In a landmark decision that is already sending shockwaves through Washington and the global economic community, the Supreme Court has fundamentally altered the balance of power over U.S. trade policy. The justices struck down the broad use of Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, a law that for decades has allowed presidents to impose tariffs and other trade restrictions under the justification of protecting national security. This provision has been a powerful tool for the executive branch, enabling swift and often unilateral action on trade matters, sometimes with far-reaching consequences for industries, workers, and consumers alike. The court's decision specifically curbs the president's power to impose tariffs under what it called vague and undefined national security claims. In recent years, this authority has been used to justify sweeping tariffs on steel, aluminum, and a range of other goods, often sparking trade wars and retaliatory measures from America's trading partners. Critics have long argued that such broad discretion undermines both the predictability of U.S. trade policy and the constitutional principle that Congress, not the president, should control the nation's economic relationships with the world. The 6-3 ruling, authored by Chief Justice John Roberts, declared that Congress cannot simply hand over its core constitutional authority to the executive branch without setting clear and meaningful limits. Roberts wrote that the Constitution vests the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations squarely in the hands of Congress, and that any delegation of this power must be accompanied by strict guidelines and oversight. The majority opinion emphasized that unchecked executive action in the name of national security risks undermining both democratic accountability and the rule of law. This decision effectively dismantles the legal foundation for the sweeping tariffs imposed in recent years, including those that have roiled global markets and strained alliances. It marks a dramatic shift in the locus of trade policy making, moving authority away from the White House and back to Congress. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle now face the challenge and the opportunity of crafting a new framework for U.S. trade policy, one that balances national security concerns with the need for open markets and stable international relationships. Free trade advocates and business groups celebrated the ruling as a victory for transparency, predictability, and the rule of law. Many argue that restoring congressional oversight will help ensure that trade policy serves the broader interests of the American economy rather than the political priorities of any one administration. The decision was also welcomed by international partners, who hope it will lead to more consistent and less confrontational U.S. trade practices. Meanwhile, protectionists and former President Trump condemned the move, warning that it could weaken America's ability to respond quickly to economic threats and protect critical industries. Supporters of strong executive action argue that the president needs flexibility to defend American jobs and security in an unpredictable world. The debate over how much power the president should have in trade matters is far from over, and the ruling is likely to fuel intense political battles in the months ahead. At its core, the Supreme Court's decision reasserts the fundamental principle of separation of powers, reminding the nation that no branch of government can act without meaningful checks and balances. By forcing a national conversation about who controls U.S. trade policy, the ruling invites Americans to reconsider how best to balance security, prosperity, and democratic accountability in a rapidly changing world. As the dust settles, the spotlight now turns to Congress. Lawmakers must grapple with the complex task of defining America's role in the global economy, setting new rules for trade, and ensuring that the United States remains both competitive and secure. The world is watching closely as the U.S. embarks on this new chapter in its economic history, with the Supreme Court's decision serving as a powerful reminder of the enduring importance of constitutional principles in shaping the nation's future. Section 232 was originally a Cold War tool allowing the president to impose tariffs if imports threatened national security. The Trump administration used it broadly, targeting allies and common goods. Plaintiffs argued this stretched the law beyond its intent, giving the president unchecked power over trade. The Supreme Court agreed, setting a stricter standard. Tariffs must address a direct, demonstrable threat to national defense. The dissent warned against judicial overreach, but the majority held firm. Presidential authority in trade is not absolute. Former President Trump lashed out at the Supreme Court, calling the decision a betrayal of American workers and accusing his own appointees of weakness. He vowed to fight back, promising to seek new laws granting the presidency sweeping trade powers. Trump's response quickly mobilized his base, framing the ruling as a political attack on his America First agenda. His rhetoric turned a complex legal issue into a populist rallying cry, ensuring the debate over trade and presidential authority will remain a central political flashpoint. The tariffs were introduced with the promise of breathing new life into U.S. manufacturing. Policymakers argued that by imposing higher duties on imported steel and aluminum, American factories would see a resurgence, jobs would return, and the nation's industrial heartland would thrive once again. But when we look beyond the rhetoric and examine the numbers, a more complex and sobering picture emerges. The data tells a different story, one that challenges the narrative of a manufacturing renaissance. While it's true that steel and aluminum jobs experienced a short-lived boost, this uptick was quickly overshadowed by losses in industries that rely on these materials. Downstream manufacturers, companies that make everything from cars to appliances, faced higher input costs, making it harder to compete both at home and abroad. Many were forced to cut jobs or even shut down entirely. Foreign governments retaliated with tariffs of their own, targeting American goods and further squeezing U.S. businesses. The ripple effects were felt far beyond the steel mills, touching communities across the country. Multiple independent studies estimate that, when all the numbers are tallied, the tariffs resulted in a net loss of over 75,000 American jobs. On top of that, the tariffs functioned as an $80 billion annual tax on American consumers and businesses, raising prices on everyday goods and squeezing household budgets. The economic pain was not limited to a single sector, it rippled through the entire economy. The trade deficit, which the tariffs were supposed to shrink, actually widened. U.S. exports, especially in agriculture, plummeted as foreign markets closed their doors to American products. Farmers found themselves with unsold crops and mounting financial pressure, while export-dependent industries struggled to stay afloat. The intended benefits of the tariffs were undermined by these unintended consequences. Instead of delivering broad economic gains, the tariffs became a costly drag on both consumers and businesses. Prices rose for everything from cars to canned goods, and small businesses faced shrinking margins. For many Americans, the promise of revitalized industry was replaced by the reality of higher costs and economic uncertainty. This economic reality did not go unnoticed. Mounting losses and widespread frustration fueled a legal challenge that ultimately made its way to the Supreme Court. The court's decision would be shaped not just by legal arguments, but by the undeniable impact the tariffs had on the nation's economy and the lives of everyday Americans. The ruling split Congress along familiar lines. Democrats and moderate Republicans praised the decision as a return to constitutional order, while Trump allies decried it as a blow to American workers. The business community largely welcomed the end of tariff uncertainty, with the Chamber of Commerce and major industries predicting billions in consumer savings. However, unions and domestic steel producers warned of renewed threats from subsidized foreign competition. The debate highlights the complex trade-offs in U.S. trade policy, where protecting one sector can harm many others. U.S. allies greeted the Supreme Court's decision with relief. The EU, Canada, and Mexico saw it as a step toward restoring stable, rules-based trade and mending strained relationships. Japan and South Korea welcomed the move, hoping for renewed cooperation. China, while not directly affected, noted the unpredictability of U.S. trade policy but may see the ruling as a constraint on future American tariffs. The decision paves the way for lifting retaliatory duties and rebuilding trust with key partners, strengthening America's global alliances. The court's decision forces Congress to reclaim its constitutional role in trade. No longer can presidents impose sweeping tariffs on allies under vague national security claims. Major trade actions will now require explicit legislative approval, making the process more transparent but also more contentious. Lawmakers must now confront tough questions about how to address unfair trade practices and support domestic industries. The era of unilateral executive trade action is over. Congress must lead or risk gridlock and uncertainty. The ruling triggered immediate political and economic ripples. Pro-tariff lawmakers rushed to restore presidential authority, while free trade advocates pushed for broader reforms. Markets rallied on hopes of reduced trade tensions, with gains in manufacturing and tech, but steel stocks tumbled. International partners began lifting retaliatory tariffs, and U.S. trade officials moved to repair alliances. The decision has become a new battleground in the culture war, ensuring trade policy will be a defining issue in the next election cycle. The Supreme Court's decision marks a pivotal turning point for U.S. trade policy, one that could reshape the nation's role in the global economy for years to come. This landmark ruling is more than just a legal technicality. It's a signal that the rules of the game are changing, and that America's approach to international commerce is entering a new era. The decision has sent ripples through Washington and across the world, as policymakers, businesses, and trading partners all try to understand what comes next. For decades, the president has held sweeping authority to impose tariffs and negotiate trade deals, often with little oversight. Now that power is shifting back to Congress. This means that no single leader will be able to unilaterally reshape America's trade relationships or disrupt global commerce with the stroke of a pen. Instead, trade policy will require broader consensus, more debate, and greater transparency. While this could slow down decision-making, it also promises more stability and predictability for businesses and trading partners worldwide. For everyday Americans, the impact could be felt at the checkout counter. As tariffs are rolled back or reconsidered, imported goods may become more affordable, leading to lower prices on everything from electronics to groceries. This could help ease inflation and stretch household budgets further, especially for families who have felt the pinch of rising costs in recent years. American exporters, particularly farmers and manufacturers, stand to gain as well. With fewer trade barriers, foreign markets that were once closed or restricted could reopen, allowing U.S. products to compete on a level playing field. This could boost sales abroad, support rural communities, and create new opportunities for growth in industries that rely on exports. On the world stage, the ruling sends a powerful message to America's allies and trading partners. It signals a renewed commitment to stable, rules-based trade and a willingness to work together to resolve disputes. This could help repair relationships that have been strained by years of uncertainty and unilateral action, paving the way for new agreements and stronger alliances. However, the path forward is not without challenges. Congress is deeply divided along partisan lines, and crafting effective trade laws will require compromise and cooperation. The question now is whether lawmakers can rise above political gridlock to create policies that benefit the nation as a whole, or whether infighting will stall progress and leave America's trade agenda in limbo. Ultimately, America's leadership in global trade hangs in the balance. The decisions made in Washington over the coming months will determine whether the U.S. can maintain its influence, support its workers and businesses, and shape the future of the global economy. The world is watching, and what happens next will have consequences far beyond America's borders.